Okay, so in this first video, we're going to look at the basics of circulation. And so we started last class looking at vessels and what vessels are. And as I mentioned in lab, you're going to walk through the anatomy of these vessels, where they are, their names. So we're gonna leave that for lab. In this video, I want to look at the actual physiology of what's going on in circulation, what's going on specifically in the vessels. So the main function of vessels is to transport blood and other nutrients, gases, compounds to cells and throughout the body. Now we're going to focus just on blood specifically and how that functions and how we're going to move things. And so we'll show you a couple of animations on how we do that. The key part to this here is understanding that, as I mentioned last class, we have an arterial side and we have a venous side of the blood. Arterial side is leaving the heart. This is when it's coming from the left ventricle to the body. This is blood that has been oxygenated. And then we have a venous side. That is blood that's traveling back towards the heart. When it's coming from the body, it is what we call deoxygenated. Now the question becomes is what happens in the middle there? What happens from arterial to venous? And this is when we get to the capillaries. Now capillaries are very unique in that they, a lot of reasons. One, they are one cell thick. As if you imagine, just remember the aorta or some of the larger arteries in your body. Well, some of those are actually quite visible to see. You can fit thousands of cells through there. However, by the time you get to the capillaries, these literally are one red blood cell thick. And so you literally have one cell going through at a time. So not surprising, the capillary is very, very thin. The walls themselves are very thin. And this is important because these are going to allow gases, nutrients, fluids to travel easily through this wall. We wouldn't want things to travel through the aorta very easily, of course. But when we get to the capillaries, we do. We need to be able to exchange whatever those things are with various cells and tissues in the body. As we see here from this picture, this is an example of one area where we're going to have an arterial side. And again, arteries are getting smaller and smaller, forming arterioles. And then we have a venous side here. This is a venule. And in between here, we have capillaries. All right, now capillaries can exist around any tissue, any cell in the body. This could be muscle. We have capillaries, a lot of capillaries around muscle, around organs, around bones, anywhere where we need exchange of any fluid, gases, nutrients, we are going to see capillaries. Now, the way these operate, and probably a good picture right here is this picture here, is that understanding that when we go from this arterial side to this venous side, we are seeing movement of a lot of different things. A lot of the movement here is being caused by diffusion. In other words, this is simply the movement of compounds along their concentration gradient, the movement of gases along their concentration gradient, even the movement of water. A good example of this, and a big one for us, is oxygen. Okay, so in the arterial blood, the pressure of oxygen, the amount of oxygen, is greater than in the venous side. All right, so we're going to see oxygen move from a high pressure to a low pressure environment. Well, if we imagine the arterial side and the venous side here, we could also imagine that, okay, well, in between, let's say there's a muscle cell right here. Well, this muscle cell requires oxygen. It needs oxygen, right, to form ATP. So in order to do that, it needs oxygen. It needs oxygen to go from this capillary into the muscle cell. So let's kind of draw this a little bit here, and we'll kind of make our best effort. I don't know that I'll do a great job, but so let's just imagine, let's make this black. Okay, so let's just say this right here, I know, that's a terrible picture. That's our muscle cell, okay? And I'll try to, good gosh, I can't even, that's really bad resolution. So there's our muscle cell. And then let's draw, where am I? Let's pick a red. That makes sense, right? And this is our capillary, right? Oops. Let's draw that right here. Okay. And let's say we have oxygen. We're going to make oxygen, in this case, gray. Okay, and oxygen here, and we have O2. And it needs to go from this capillary into the muscle cell. Well, it will do this by diffusion, and it'll diffuse based on its concentration gradient. In other words, it is in greater concentration in the capillary than it is in the muscle cell. Right? Now, oxygen is not the only gas. Another one we have, and we're going to make this, let's make it green, even though it's not at all green. Another one we have is carbon dioxide. Okay, well, like we said, oxygen is higher here in the capillaries than it is in the muscle cell. However, the reverse is also true, in that CO2, carbon dioxide, is higher here than it is here. And so we are going to see CO2 by diffusion move in to the capillary and then ultimately to the venous blood. And so the exchange of these gases is incredibly important. I mean, literally as we speak, around your muscle cells, we're seeing an exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, in order to adequately perfuse and adequately form ATP in those cells. This is just one example. There are many, many more. We don't need just muscle cells, and we don't need just oxygen and CO2. This could easily be glucose. This could easily be an amino acid. This could easily be any possible thing, an electrolyte, potassium, sodium, whatever those things are that may be required in this environment. And so understanding this transport here, and again, you can see a good picture here of the various things in the blood that are diffusing in these capillaries. Another key part to these capillaries is that they can actually control the amount of fluid going in and out. If we wanted to get more fluid, more blood to an area, we would want to make these capillaries bigger. And we have a name for that. It's called vasodilation. Right? Again, allows more fluid, more blood in these areas. If we wanted to restrict blood flow to these areas, we have a name for that. It's called vasoconstriction. Now, you experience this all the time. Imagine, for example, if you go somewhere where it's cold, maybe up north, maybe just a cold classroom, and you notice that your fingers start to get kind of cool and the blood seems to be restricted. Well, what's going on? Well, in order to keep core temperature normal, what these vessels have done is constrict. That constriction has caused less blood flow to flow through these capillaries, and you're feeling that as cold. And in fact, over time, potentially in a really cold environment, it'll be very difficult for the cells, muscle cells, around here to contract because they've had a lot less blood flow, a lot less oxygen, and they can't contract as well. We experience this in cold weather. When our muscles can't contract very well, they get kind of stiff, almost kind of numb. You're feeling that. You also experience the opposite. A good example of this is if maybe your finger accidentally gets caught in a door, which would be horrible, or you hit it against something. Well, it starts to get warm. Well, what's going on? Well, when you have damage to those cells, you have these vessels on the arterial side dilate. Well, why? Well, you need to get blood flow there. You need immune cells. You need to deal with the damage there. And so we have a lot of vasodilation to get blood flow to that area. And one of the things we experience is that area gets red. It gets warm. By the way, same thing we experience when we blush. When our cheeks get red, when it's really warm outside, we experience the same thing. And so that vasodilation occurs. And all of this is in these areas of the capillaries. And so obviously they play a very important role, whether it's vasodilation, whether it's vasoconstriction. One other thing we're going to see with vessels and this movement of blood, and I talked about this last class, so I'll just kind of briefly mention it here, is that the pressure in the heart is not adequate enough to push blood all the way to all the areas of the body and then back through the venous side of circulation back to the heart. They just can't produce enough pressure. Your heart's not that strong. And so what's unique about these veins, as we mentioned before, is that they have these valves, these one-way valves, that allow blood to move in one direction. Well, thankfully, you have help in this. You have skeletal muscle. We have a lot of it. Some of you have more than others. And this skeletal muscle is going to allow movement as these skeletal muscles contract. Literally, it's like squeezing a ketchup bottle or toothpaste. It's going to allow blood to move through this venous circulation. And because these valves are one way, it's going to move this blood in one way back to the heart. This is why if you stand for a long time and blood pools in your extremities, your legs, well, if the blood pools down here in your legs, it's not making it back to your heart, not making it back to your brain, and then bad things happen like passing out and things like that. And so this concept of moving blood to the heart via skeletal muscle contraction is really, really, really important. Okay, good place to pause for this. The next video will finish circulation, and then we'll move on to the blood.